Hello, my name is Satrina Reid, and I'm a program manager with the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. And today I have the privilege of having a conversation with my colleague, Chau. Kaitan teaches here at Calvin University. He teaches a course on worship and culture worldwide. And in addition to that, Kaitan is a resource development specialist for the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship and also an associate editor for Reformed Worship. He has degrees in choral, conducting, international business, and worship. Welcome, Kaitan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be having this conversation with you around cultural intelligence. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you teach a course here at Calvin on worship and culture. And we talk about cultural intelligence, but a lot of people don't know what that is. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit about what is cultural intelligence? Some people might hear it as CQ, but what is that?
Well, cultural intelligence is a field that does not have a long history. Actually, it started just around the turn of the century. We talked about IQ, and IQ focuses on somebody's intellectual capability, academic capability. And later on, we have EQ, emotional. So how do we see people react? How do people interact with other people? So where IQ and EQ leave off, here comes cultural intelligence, or we call CQ. So CQ is still being researched. There are a lot of study being done on it. And let me read some definitions. You can see that even though in the last 20 years or so, the definitions are getting refined. And the focus is also, there's a little subtle change in the focus of these definitions. So back in 2003, it's about 20 years ago, early researchers noticed that IQ and EQ don't explain how we interact with people completely, because there are a lot of cultural context there. So after the research, they come up with this term, cultural intelligence. And CQ refers to the ability to adapt to cultural settings. And as the years go by, more research are being done. And researchers believe that this capability is not something that are inborn, less similar to IQ and EQ. More or less, you are inborn with a certain level of capability. But cultural intelligence can be developed. So a few years after, David Livermore, who is the director of the Cultural Intelligence Center, gave this definition. So CQ is a person's capability to function effectively in a variety of cultural settings. And that include both internationally and domestically environment. So we now understand that CQ doesn't only refer to international encounters, but domestically we can utilize our CQ as well. Not too long ago, one of the professors and administrators at Calvin, her name is Penelin Dijkstra-Pruin. She defines interpersonal CQ this way. Interpersonal CQ is the capability to engage in constructive ways with people who are different from us and with ideas that are different from our own, using an understanding of cultures and cultural identity. So we can see that refinement in those definitions. And this is our current understanding of CQ.
Great. So we can see that it's an important topic, and you are teaching it as a part of the curriculum here at Calvin University. Now, I'm intrigued by the fact that you're teaching worship and culture worldwide. And so can you tell us a little bit about that course and how CQ overlaps with worship and just what this course is about, and why is it important for students and for those who are in the church? I mean, because we're teaching them about worship as well. How do these things overlap?
Yeah, it is interesting. Several years back, Calvin University has a core program, core curriculum that requires every graduate from Calvin to have some basic understanding in certain areas. So we call it our core curriculum. And one of those requirements is a cultural competency, or we call it cross-cultural engagement course, so a CCE course we call it. So every Calvin graduate will learn how to think cross-culturally and be able to act wisely in a cross-cultural environment. And of course, we think about how to build students' capability, their competency in cultural area. And our director, Professor John Vivliet, came up with an idea that because we have this Calvin Symposium, and at the early part of the calendar year in January, and in that environment, we have not only a lot of people coming from all parts of the world gathering here at Calvin campus to participate in the symposium, we also have worship services that we utilize many different kinds of music or liturgy. So the idea was, well, why don't we use this worship lens to look at cultural competency? And what if we encourage our students to participate in the symposium, but not just passively participate? Why don't we equip them with CQ so that whether they are watching, participating in these services, or when they engage with different people from all parts of the world, how can we engage with people more effectively? So there came by this idea of having a worship and culture worldwide course. So as part of the CCE program, but we look at culture through the lens of worship.
Excellent. And so can you give me an example of what that would look like? I get, we look at it through the lens of worship, or worship through the lens of cultural intelligence. Our church is a global church. And so can you give us an example of or a scenario of what that would look like, where a student or you or I would utilize our cultural intelligence in a worship setting?
My engagement with the students, from the reflections so far, I noticed that many of them would say that they came from a very not diversified environment. They may have been go to the same church throughout their life, a young life, up to like 20-some years old. They have been to the same church, same environment, and they live in a community that's not very diverse. So they have a set idea of what Christian worship looks like or should look like. So when they go into a different setting, let's say, can we ever imagine people from Asia, how do they worship? When can we imagine how people with the Hispanic culture, how do they worship? Or if we're talking about people from the African culture, how do they worship? Very quickly, very quickly, students would say that, I like this, or I don't like this. Or sometimes they think that this is not right. The way that we do things seems more right, and what they do things looks weird, strange. Are they really authentic? Are they really following the Bible? So all kinds of questions. So the good thing is, as we look at world culture through the lens of worship, we come to realize that, as you said earlier, the church is a worldwide church, it's a global church. And not only that, we look at the horizontal part, like this is a worldwide church. At the same time, we notice that the church is historic church as well, right? So practice could change over time, but at the same time there are certain truth in there. So what it is happening now is, as we talk about culture and worship, we emphasize the Nairobi Statement. in the Nairobi statement, we talk about worship should be or have the following components. Worship should be transcultural. Worship should be contextual. Worship should be countercultural, and worship should be cross-cultural. So students started to think about, oh yes, because there are certain practices, there are certain truths in worship that should be transcultural. The church worldwide or the historic church, we adhere to those principles and practices. These are dear to our heart. This is something that we will hold on to no matter what. Under persecution, good times, whatever, we hold on to those. But then worship should be contextualized, right? You or many students will heard of the story that, when Western missionaries go to other places, they brought the Western liturgy and practices to these new cultures. And nowadays, how do we adapt? How do we use our heart music to express? How do we use our body movement? How do we read, the passage? So those kind of things can be contextualized. And then, of course, there are things that we are, the Christian faith will stand against the culture. So how do we understand that the Christian faith on a certain aspects are countercultural? And then, of course, the Great Commission, when we have to take the Christian faith to the unreached people, and that's the cross-cultural part of that. And so that Nairobi statement helps a lot for our students to frame our discussion on worship and culture.
That's great. I love the Nairobi statement. And I think that we learn so much about ourselves through cultural intelligence, and we learn about others through cultural intelligence. And if we learn about cultural intelligence and we then apply it, I think that we can also learn a lot about God that we didn't know in our own little corner of the world, and how God is working in our siblings from around the world and in different places.
Very true.
So thank you for sharing that. Now, you told me what the students are learning in your class. I want to now kind of turn the page and say, what are you learning about teaching cultural intelligence, and what may you be learning from your students?
Well, let's go back to some basic thing about culture. When we think about culture, we often think about national culture. So we think about people from different corners of the world. They have their own culture or they bring their own culture. But culture is more than that, right? So culture, there are subcultures, even in this country, right? Even within the Calvin community or in our own church, there are different subcultures. And we can see that subculture can be looked at by age, generational differences, gender, how we think things differently, and our upbringing. So to me, living in, I'm a Chinese, living in West Michigan, right? Living among a lot of Dutch people, how do I communicate with them? And when I go to church, I have a church choir, I lead church choirs. And then we have a variety of age in the group. And some of them are late teens, and some of them are older. So as a choir director, how do I relate to people from different age groups, different stage of their life? When I give examples, when I give instructions, when I talk about expectations, how would that be conceived by different people? So obviously, men and women might think a little bit differently in terms of things. How do we stay in a connection or commanding position as a choir director? How do we communicate well with men and women, different age and different experience in singing? And of course, me as a Chinese person working with people with a majority of Dutch people at our church, and how do I communicate with them? So how do I use some examples from the Dutch culture or use example from my culture in order to illustrate a point? So to me, it's a lifelong learning process, simply because like you cannot understand and master everything. You know, it's a constantly learning process. So that teaching in world culture and cultural values and cultural intelligence actually is helping me as a person, you know, to communicate better and work with people better.
Has there been anything that has come from your students that surprised you, or something that you didn't know that just by teaching the course has enhanced your learning? And you talked about applying it to your church, but I'm just wondering about in the classroom, how you've seen students, you know, have those light bulb moments, or those moments where they're enlightened and or having those aha moments about themselves or about how they interact with others.
Yeah, good question. No matter this course is offered in a 3-week setting or 8-week setting, there are a lot of self-reflection. So I call it self-discovery process. How do they see themselves, why they are at this stage of their life, you know, why they are here, and what kind of culture they brought in, and what can they contribute in that learning. And at the end of the course, usually there is a summative paper or project when they try to, I encourage them to look at what we learn, you know, give them some prompts and guiding questions, and ask students to reflect on what did you learn, what did you get from this course, and how do you move forward. And there are a few things that surprised me and pleasantly surprised. One student, or actually more than one student, mentioned that they are from the international community, and that they speak 3-4 languages, and they have a lot of experience in working with different cultures. So they are not too enthusiastic, actually, you know, to come to this course, because they felt that they are well equipped with CQ and this capability. So why am I have to go through this course? Actually, they want to get exemption from Calvin, you know, because I get all this cultural competency. And Calvin said, no, you still have to take it. And then that's why they're in my class. So they came into this class with not much expectation. And then at the end, looking at the reflection, and they said that, you know what, I might have this kind of inborn or understanding because of the culture I was brought up, or I have this experience already, but what this course has helped me is to gain the vocabulary. It's not just that, oh, I'm good at dealing with people, working with people, but I'm actually able to describe the differences, because people are from different culture, and then they talk differently, they behave a little bit differently, and the expectation is a little different. Right? So now I can tell it's because of these, the 10 cultural values or some other models that we learn in class. So that was encouraging for me. Even though you think you have a lot of experience in that area, you're still learning. And I received a paper. I was really encouraged by what I saw. And the student was extremely enthusiastic about the learning, and then she thought that was such a valuable thing, and this particular area, CQ, you know, everybody from our church should learn about it. So here's my big dream. Within 5 years, I want to be so cultural competent and in this area that I can teach a course like that at my church, because I believe this is one of the key capability that we should gain, not just a church setting or worship, but in life. Because CQ, as we look at it, even though a lot of students express that, you know, they did not grow up in a very multicultural environment, or West Michigan is not a very multicultural environment, we know that even though if we don't visit many parts of the world, a lot of people are coming here. And how do we work with people who are different from us effectively in a worship setting, in a business setting, in a nonprofit setting, in a mission setting? So those skills can be transferred. across many areas. And of course, when we talk about subculture, how to work with people who are from a different social economic class, how do we understand where they're coming from? Those kind of things are very, very helpful, practical tools.
Yes, they really are. I like the way you kind of rounded it out. We started to talk about how people tend to, it used to be your IQ was the most important thing. And then it's like, what do I know? How intelligent am I? And then the emotional, the EQ, the emotional intelligence, and how well do I know myself, and
Right.
how can I interact with others because I know myself well. But cultural intelligence, I think, will probably take us much, much further as we interact with people and understanding that people come from different backgrounds. And I really appreciate you bringing in subcultures, because even if we don't go to, as you said, into another part of the world, even on this campus, in our city, in our state, there are cultures, vast cultures and diverse cultures, even within where we live. And so I appreciate that. And I think that with all of the division that we see all over the world, if we learned a little bit about cultural intelligence and how what someone may do may not be right or wrong, it's just a different value.
Correct.
This is, we just value different things
Right.
at a different level.
Right.
And so I appreciate that. For someone who may want to know more about cultural intelligence, can you recommend some resources that people may be able to learn more and to start to grow in their knowledge about cultural intelligence?
Yes. We have been using textbook by one of our Calvin professors. Her name is Penelin Dijkstra-Pruin. And she published this book, Understanding Us and Them, in 2019. So it's a fairly recent book. In this book, she does not talk about CQ in general, but she refined the idea and talked about a specific area called interpersonal cultural intelligence, or we call it ICQ. So the ICQ focuses more on the communication aspect. How do we build relationship? So that goes back to, I would say, echo to the earlier research about CQ. In the earlier research, there are three areas that we talk about: the head, the knowledge, the body, how we react, and then the soul, where's our heart? Are we being with the people? And Penelin Dijkstra-Pruin's book is building on that framework as well. How do we know more about other culture? How do we avoid stereotyping of other cultures? And then talk about how do we build relationship? How do we understand the practice, the products and perspectives of other culture? And how do we act then? And then, of course, the important thing is how do we develop a heart for other culture or people from other cultures? So this is a very helpful book and very recent as well. So I encourage our students to use it. The good thing about the book is it's very simple to read, just a few chapters, 5 chapters, focusing on a few areas. And not only that, at the back of the book, I would say, one half of the book are activities. And those are, some of them are self-reflection exercises. Some of them you can work with a small group or a small team to discover about how we think and how we can expand our thinking. So this is a very, very helpful resource that we are using in class. And we also encourage our student, actually I want the student to do the CQ assessment available through the CQ Center. And for that is a much more scientific approach to research. So students would do a survey online, and then right after that, they get a result. So not only students would get a scale on their four capabilities of CQ, CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, and CQ action. So they see where they are stronger at, and room for improvement in those areas. And that assessment also gave them some understanding about cultural value. And in the CQ Center model, the 10-dimension model, how do they understand time? How do they understand, are they a more individualistic person or more collectivistic person? How do they look at these several values that come up with the, in the assessment? So those are the tools that we use in class to help students to gain a better understanding. And of course, we want them to participate, want students to watch. Before COVID-19, we want our students to participate in person at the symposium. With COVID-19, when the symposium is online, so I encourage them to watch. So every week, I ask the student to watch at least one service, at least one video or podcast, and watch a couple of the Psalm gallery. And students would come back and say that, oh, you know what? I have no idea what they're talking about because I don't understand the language. But I understand what is going on because you see that, Christian worship framework there. And sometimes they say that, oh, this is a service from Ireland. Of course, they speak English. I understand every single word, but they do things differently than what we are doing. So those kind of things are very interesting. So I would encourage, if anyone wants to learn about culture, even if you are not able to go to different places, come to the CICW website, look at the past recordings available on our website, because that is one step we can do, even though in person might be the best, but at least one thing that we can use our technology to learn about, see the culture firsthand.
Yes. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. Sounds like you've learned a lot in teaching the course, and I'm just so grateful that we can have this discussion, and hopefully other people will benefit from having this discussion, learned a little bit more about cultural intelligence. Hopefully people were intrigued and will learn more so that we can understand one another and be a better body of Christ. So thank you very much, Kaitan. I'm so glad that you were able to join us.
Thank you.